Goes on sale today. It's at Amazon.com. The Jefferson Lies. This is a book that I've told you before, there's the book, The 5,000 Year Leap, is a book that every library in America should have. Everybody should have The 5,000 Year Leap and read it with your kids. Another book I would put in that category is this, The Jefferson Lies. Every library in America of everybody who is a conservative, quite honestly, everybody who is a Democrat, because the Democratic Party is Jefferson. It was Jefferson. But everybody should know Thomas Jefferson. He is the author of the Declaration of Independence. You understand Jefferson, and he is, the Ellis book that you brought up about Sally Hemings, the name of it is, I've always felt, was good because that's the way you look at Jefferson in a way. He's the American Sphinx. Mm-hmm. He is this guy that he is extraordinarily complicated. He is diametrically opposed to himself at times. All men are created equal, except for the ones that are working on my farm right now. And so how do you, people will say he was a bigot, he was a slave owner.
Right.
So that's not a lie. That's a pretty big, that's a pretty big one.
That's the elephant in the room, and you got to deal with that. Right. So how do you deal with that? Pretty easy when you go back and read the historical stuff. And let me just back up to say, if that is true, that Jefferson was a racist and a bigot, then my next question becomes, why did Frederick Douglass champion him as one of the best forces for abolition? Why did Martin Luther King champion Jefferson? Why did Henry Highland Garnett, who gave the speech when they ended slavery in U.S. Congress, why did he say Jefferson is rejoicing today? Why was Jefferson cited by governments across the world as being one of the greatest leaders in trying to end slavery? And why was it that one of his first bills that he ever did when he entered office as state legislator was to abolish slavery in Virginia? And at the federal level, that's one of the bills he did, to abolish slavery in the United States. It failed by one vote at the federal level. And he has this piece in his diary. He says, "Oh, would to God that he would have changed one heart. If he could have changed one heart, we could end slavery." And so what you find is Jefferson.
David, could you say that again? Because I never learned any of that.
No.
When he was president?
Not when he was president. In the Continental Congress, he introduced a bill in Continental Congress to abolish slavery in the United States. He'd been working on it for 15 years. And he wanted to abolish slavery and missed it by one vote.
So people will say, well, then why didn't he free his slaves?
And the answer is...
Not even on his death did he free his slaves.
And the answer is exactly what he said in his writings. State law would not allow him to free his slaves. Right. He wanted to. He tried to change state law on a number of cases. He went into court and argued for slaves in court. He wrote in his own...
because that'll sound like a bunch of gobbledygook to people. Explain what that law said.
The law in Virginia, they relaxed the law for a little bit that said, okay, we'll let you... At the time of the American Revolution, they started getting a little freedom-minded, and they said, okay, we'll let you emancipate your slaves. That's how George Washington ended his slavery. He freed his slaves on his death. Mm-hmm. They said, Then they came back and changed the law and said, well, not on your death. We're not going to do that anymore. And so Jefferson's not able to do it. And they also have a state law that says if you're in debt, you cannot free any of your slaves because we're going to take them to pay the debt. Jefferson was $2.5 million in debt. So in his case, he cannot. And by the way,
is that today's dollars?
That's today's dollars. That's today's dollars. $2.5 million in today's dollars in debt.
Well, and then that's another.
Well, let me throw out one more.
He didn't believe in debt.
He didn't believe in debt, but he inherited. Here's what happened to him. He inherited a lot of...
Wait, finish the thing on the slavery, and then we'll go to debt.
One of his neighbors in Virginia, Robert Carter, is very wealthy, has no debt, becomes a Methodist Christian, says slavery is really bad, and he has about 500 slaves. He frees them all, frees every slave, has no debt. 75 years later, they're still trying to free his slaves because of the state laws in Virginia. It's so convoluted that even though he freed 500 slaves, so what happened, people started moving out of Virginia to free their slaves. So Jefferson helped start the Abolition Society in Indiana and in Illinois and other places. He encourages people to leave Virginia, take their slaves with them, go into the new territories, and help make them slave-free. And so as he becomes president, he gets to bring those territories in officially. And
no one knows that.
No one knows that. But it's all in his writings. This is all there. Everybody today says he's this big slavery guy, and that's just not the case. Now, he had slaves, and he openly admitted, he said, I've only ever seen slaves in a condition of slavery. And therefore, it appears to me that blacks seem to be undereducated. Yeah, what he just said. They've only been in slavery, no education. He said, but I'm looking for experience to prove me otherwise, which is why when Benjamin Banneker, who is a black who laid out Washington, D.C. under Thomas Jefferson, he took Benjamin Banneker's mathematical works and sent it to France and said, look, here's a black man that far surpasses any white man in thinking and ability. You guys need to herald this in your anti-slavery societies in France. So Jefferson finds blacks that are showing exceptional ability and helps get them known overseas to show why blacks need to be free.
Same thing with Benjamin Franklin with Phyllis Wheatley.
Phyllis Wheatley.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, did the same thing.
First black poetess.
They were looking for people that could prove to the American people, this is not what you think.
That's right.
It's not what you think.
And Jefferson also has a quote. He said, look, just because Newton is greater in intellect than we are doesn't mean that he gets more rights than we do. And just because my slaves appear to be less intellectual than maybe we are doesn't mean they get less rights. He says you get equal rights because of your creation by God, not because of your intellectual capacity. And so he openly acknowledged that the situation where I've seen slavery, there appears to be a less intellectual thing there. But that's why he pointed out guys who were intellectual, because it's an equal rights issue. It has nothing to do with abilities or anything else. And Jefferson's the one who articulated that.
Did you read the book Jefferson's Vinegar?
I did not.
Or is it $1 Billion Vinegar or something? I think it's Jefferson Vinegar. It's a story about the guy who sold a bottle of what was supposedly Thomas Jefferson's wine. It was a huge, Forbes is the one who bought it, went for millions of dollars. It turns out it was vinegar, but more so, it turns out that it was fake. And it was one of the biggest scams in the art world or in the wine world of all time. And it was really quite amazing. But in that book, can somebody look up the name of that to see if it's Billionaire's Vinegar or Billionaire's Vinegar? Really great book. But in that, it talks about how Jefferson, and I don't know if this is true, put himself in debt on a large part from his wine, that he would have people over to his house and big dinners and everything else, and he always liked to have the finest wines, and he was shipping wines from France like nobody's business, and that caused a lot of his debt. Is that true?
That's part of it. We were going to talk about debt a minute ago, and what happened with his debt was when his father-in-law died, his wife's father died, he inherited a lot of debt at that point. So what he does is sell the lands to pay off the debt. Then we get in the American Revolution. So he puts the lands into a fund in the American Revolution, and because of inflation, he lost 98.5% of what he had put in there. It would have been enough to pay off the lands to Great Britain. They wouldn't take it because we're at war. So he loses 98.5%. So the debt's huge. So part of it is he still continues to live the lifestyle that he was used to, and part of it was the wine. But the other thing that got him in trouble was he paid his slaves for what they did. He paid them as if they were workers. And so if you fish or if you hunt or if you create things, he paid them as employees. And that was another thing that put him into debt.
Doesn't that make them not slaves at that point?
No.
No, they're still under state law.
They couldn't leave.
Yeah.
Right, but you're paying them.
Yeah,
but I know that
Hey, Pat, I tell you what, you're gonna live here.
You're doing that to us right now.
You're gonna live here in the studios, and I can break up your family at any time.
No,
but I'm gonna pay you well.
Yeah. Right. But
so
it was not a typical.
It was not typical slavery. That's right. That's right. And that's what he was trying to do within the constraints of state law to be able to try to change that. And so, the notion of him is this racist slave owner bigot. Well, slave owner, but not at his own will.
Imagine if your children could actually argue this about Thomas Jefferson.
You bet.
If they could just know one founder, it would probably be Jefferson, because Jefferson is separation of church and state, which is a lie. Jefferson is the key to they're all nothing but racial bigots, especially because he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. So they use that line. So he's really not as an American Sphinx as you think he is. Because I've always had a hard time saying, well, he said all men are created equal, but he had slaves, and I knew about the debt and everything else. But it doesn't really lock in until you see, the law, and then what he did to try to thwart that and to change that and to set up anti-slavery.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, when you look at history and you find Abraham Lincoln championing Jefferson as an abolition guy. You find John Quincy Adams championing Jefferson as an abolition guy. And again, so many black civil rights leaders, Francis Grimke, just Henry Highland Garnett, all these guys, black and white, he was the abolition guy up until this generation. And then now suddenly he's the racist bigot.
If there was only a book that you could read that would help dispel some of those lies about Jefferson.
Oh, my gosh.
If there was only a book.
I've heard there is one.
You're kidding.
No, it's called The Jefferson Lies. It's by David Barton.
Yeah, but is it out? Can I get it?
It's out today.
What an amazing
You can get it out today.
That is incredible.
You don't even have to go to a bookstore. You could just go online to Amazon.com.
But you got to ship it from another country overseas, right?
No, you ship it right here. Made in America, printed here in America, written here in America. Wow. It's incredible.
I love
and you know what I love? The profits go to David Barton, who's a really good guy and writes a lot of these books.
Huh.
And so it helps keep him in. And,
nice.
you know, the other nice thing about it, they say, is that it takes this, excuse the expression, this isn't my expression, this would be somebody else's, I don't know whose, but the liberal bastards that went and have an agenda and not based in facts had it pulled off the New York Times bestseller list because it just didn't have the facts. This has taken all of their arguments and dismantled all of their arguments, all footnoted, and by the way, you will see the actual documents tonight at 5 o'clock. Don't miss that on the Blaze TV.
What do you have? Close to 75 pages of notes at the end of this?
Close to 1,000 footnotes.
That's amazing. That's absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and some of the things that you have dispelled is, obviously we talked about Sally Hemings, but also that Jefferson was an atheist or an anti-Christian. He detested
I want to get into that
clergy.
tonight at 5.
Thomas Jefferson was a racist who opposed equality for black Americans. I mean, those are just a few. So,
and founded a secular university. The Jefferson Lies, available everywhere. Teach your children the truth. The Jefferson Lies by David Barton. Also tonight on the after the program at 5 o'clock, David Barton joins us with the historic documents that you just have to see.